Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I thank the Japan-America Society of Southern California and Sasakawa Foundation. Nancy was telling me that a lot of people like to come here in January, but if you're from Washington, D.C., where the heat index, I should say swamp and humidity index, is about 110 degrees, you're happy to come here in June as well. So I am a pleasure to join you, and I can't think of a better place to kick off our American side of the rollout for the Japan Matters for America project. We, last November, rolled this project out across several cities in Japan in cooperation with the Japan Center for International Exchange and, of course, the Sasakawa Foundation in Tokyo. Counsel General Ihara mentioned the usability of this product, or I should say. And so what I wanted to do before people go into very specific discussions of macroeconomic issues in Japan and U.S.-Japan relations, as well as issues related to Southern California, is to tell you what this project is and why we did it, because I think that will give some indication of why we did it in the manner we did it. The first thing I think I should say is that this brochure also comes with an associated website of the same title, which is accessible to anyone. There's no subscription, it's free. And it is constantly updated with new information, reports, and developments on U.S.-Japan relations. So, for example, after the horrible tragedy of March 11th, there's information on how the incident and the particularly affected region impacted on U.S.-Japan relations, for example. So we keep an ongoing blog, as it were, on the U.S.-Japan relationship. The second thing I should say is that the Japan Matters for America project is part of a much larger initiative called Asia Matters for America. And that's really kind of where my story begins. As Dan alluded to, I spent the last 15 years of my life working for the U.S. Defense Department in various capacities, and posted out at U.S. Pacific Command in Honolulu. And when I came back to Washington after many years of being away, I realized in some ways how far and distant Asia was from the day-to-day sort of considerations of Washington. Though many functional issues were raised, Asia as a region still was very difficult to interact with. And so as I began to sit down and think as the newly appointed director how we could make various impacts of Asia known to Americans across the non-expert community. So I stress that because this isn't for people at the table who are really experts on Asia, on Japan, on U.S.-Japan relations, but for people who may not have had much experience with the region, students, teachers not focusing on Asia, business groups, local officials. And I always feel a little sensitive about saying this, but congressional staff and maybe even members of Congress who haven't necessarily been thinking about this. So that's what the project is to sort of systematically show how our engagement with Asia affects us nationally, at the state level, and at the congressional district level, across a range of variables from tourism to civic society relationships like sister cities to economic issues, etc. Why did we do it? Again, it was alluded to by Dan and Consul General Ihara in some sense. There wasn't much interest in Japan, to be very blunt. The narrative, as it is in Washington about Asia these days, is about China. And it sort of overwhelms everything else. And when we started doing this Asia Matters for America data work and research and trying to create the graphics, a stunning sort of thing kept coming out of the data, which is, notwithstanding China's increasing importance, just how structurally important Japan still remains to the United States and the U.S. remains to Japan. Now, this may well change in the future, of course, as Mr. Ihara said, but what we found in our research is that no other relationship in Asia is so widespread across states, congressional districts, and nationally, across so many variables, and is structurally so important to the U.S.-Japan relationship. And in a way, the tragedy of March 11th has highlighted this in a number of ways, from supply chains to economic impacts to global impacts, etc. But we wanted to bring this front and center, so the Japan Matters for America project was the first one we did to sort of highlight this continuing relationship. And we worked very closely with our partners at Sasakawa and, of course, the Japan Center for International Exchange, who were our Japanese data partners. And what we found in showing this data and briefing it out to Congress was that there's some remarkable statistics that 44 of 50 U.S. states have Japan as one of their top 10 export destinations. For example, that we found that, and I should interject here and say that none of this data should be taken with the precision of physics. This is not physics. This is statistics and data, and some of it is, at best imperfect. But it gives us a baseline for comparison and kind of tracking over time. Another finding we had was that almost 665,000 jobs in the United States are accounted for by Japanese investment in the United States. So a lot of these things that are being lost in the debate in Washington over China or over other issues, or sort of the difficulties that Japan has been facing that Dan spoke about, we wanted to sort of reflect a more sober assessment of the continuing importance of the U.S.-Japan relationship. So this is our effort to do so. One of the things I always conclude by saying in sort of rolling out this product is that because it is an ongoing living effort, in other words, there's an ongoing website, there's ways to rejigger the data and the graphics. If you have suggestions, or if you see flaws or different ways of portraying this, many of you will have very good insights into this, and as we've launched it in Japan and elsewhere, we've received some very good and creative ideas about how we can improve the project. So with that, let me stop, and I'll be happy, of course, to take questions with the rest of the panel when that time comes. Thank you very much indeed.
Our next speaker will be Mr. McMorrow, and I should say that he does have a plane to catch at 5 o'clock, so we will hopefully have a little bit of time for questions before he leaves. And I want to call your attention to some small blue cards on your tables where you can write out questions and send them up here. So with that, Mr. McMorrow.
Thank you very much, Dan, and I really feel very fortunate to be here today, and I was kind of reflecting on what some of the other speakers have already said. What I'm going to do today is really not talk about statistics as much as my own personal experiences in doing business in Japan. And I don't know if unique is the right word, but I do have a perspective, having grown up here in Southern California. And as I was telling Doug here a couple minutes ago, I'm one of 9 kids. The thought of myself ever being involved in starting a business in Japan in 1992 was like the furthest thing from my imagination. And so, as Mark Sullivan knows, this is a little bit of I would call a trip down memory lane, because in 1992 I was actually speaking to the Japan American Society. I had just come back from my first trip to Tokyo, and it was a period of time where everybody was very, very depressed about what was going on in Japan, all the people doing business, most of the Japanese business leaders, and I actually felt that it was one of the great opportunities. And I tend to be one of those people that, as Christina knows, I'm kind of the eternal optimist, and so I'm always looking for the opportunity. So we were lucky enough to start a real estate business in Japan in 1992 with a senior person from Mitsubishi Corporation and a secretary. And that was how we started. We initially were a brokerage company involved in a lot of the dispositions that the Japanese companies were doing really here in New York and Hawaii to a greater extent. But off of that, we started buying Japanese real estate, and we really started in 1998, and we bought 140 office buildings in Japan. We bought a significant amount of debt that was secured by real estate, and on the strength of that, we created a public company. And we were one of the first public companies to go public, first U.S. real estate companies to go public in Japan in 2002. So for the last 20 years, we've had, very significant holdings in Japan. We created two very successful companies there. Two public REITs got spawned off of the Japanese company that we took public there in 2002. And it all started with, from a company here, Kennedy Wilson here in the United States, that really didn't know the first thing about doing business in Japan. Having said that, I think the personal things that I take away from my experience there is that I learned in Japan that the strength of the handshake and doing if you don't do what you say you're going to do in Japan, you're going to have a short-lived career in Japan. And we've been able now to really replicate that in other parts of the globe. So lucky enough, last week, we bought a fairly sizable real estate company in Dublin, Ireland, that is going to be our base for Europe. I was also telling Doug that really the reason that it gave me the conviction to do that was the experience that we had in Japan, where an American company could go to a country like Japan, make some very, very great friends there, do a significant amount of business, a lot of times on a handshake. We sold one of the biggest office buildings in New York City, got paid a very, very big fee. I didn't even have a contract with the seller. He wired me the fee. So I learned out of that whole experience that it's a very small world. Even in the real estate business, which is obviously not a very high-tech business, you can create a global business out of that. But it was all these experiences that I had in Japan that really gave us the strength to do that. And then from a personal perspective, and I think it's a good example of what I'm talking about, I actually happened to be in New York at the rating agencies. We were doing a debt offering, and I got a phone call. Did I hear what had happened in Japan with the earthquake? And we were that day closing one of the largest financings with a group of banks in Japan that we had done business with for many, many years. And of course, obviously right away you worry about your people. I worried about the people at our company in Japan and found out that they were all safe. And then I had to turn my attention to, what are we going to do about this major financing that we're actually closing that day? And I think it's just a very solid example of what I'm talking about. The banker that we were working with called me up. Don't worry about it. We're going to close the financing today. And so, for setting all the statistics aside, I can only tell you from an American business person's perspective how grateful I am really to the experiences that we have had in Japan over the last 20 years. Today, one of the largest property casualty companies in the world, which is Fairfax Financial, based in Toronto, and Kennedy Wilson are partners in a very significant multifamily apartment business in Japan that we own in a private company. And we're looking for ways to grow that business. We're not looking for ways to exit the market, so to speak. So if you think about back to where I started, we're growing up here in Southern California. If you did not have the influence here in California that we've received from not only the Japanese population, but the Korean population, and now the Chinese population, and so on. I was telling somebody today at lunch, I'm not sure where Southern California would fit in globally today. But it has been a very, very big part of my life, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.